Shaq was sitting in his private lounge when he heard something that bothered him deeply. One of his team members showed him a short video of a poor man being pushed away from a restaurant. The man only asked for a glass of water, but the workers shouted at him and threw him out. Shaq felt something heavy hit his heart. He had seen many sad things in life, but this felt different. He kept watching the video again and again, and each time, the man's helpless eyes stayed in his mind. Shaq turned off the screen slowly and looked at his team with a serious face. They had never seen him like this before. He usually joked, laughed, and made everyone around him smile, but today his eyes were cold and thoughtful. He asked his team in a calm voice why people were so cruel to someone who was just thirsty. His team had no answer. They tried to tell him that some people judge quickly, some are scared, and some simply don't care. But Shaq shook his head. He said that kindness should not depend on who the person is. Kindness should not be for strong people only. Even the weak, the needy, the poor, everyone deserves respect. He leaned back on the couch and sighed. He said he wanted to know how people truly behaved when no cameras were around and when no one knew the truth. One of his assistants laughed a little, thinking Shaq was just expressing emotions. But Shaq did not laugh back. He stared straight at her and said he wanted to go undercover. The whole room became silent. Everyone looked at him like he had suddenly lost his mind. Shaq going undercover? Shaq pretending to be poor? Shaq living on the street even for one day? Sounded crazy. His manager quickly told him that it was dangerous, unnecessary, and risky. People might hurt him. Someone might try to rob him. Someone might record him secretly. But Shaq was not listening to their fears. He had already made up his mind. He told them he wanted to feel the truth with his own eyes. He wanted to sit on the sidewalk like a needy person and see if people still had kindness in their hearts. He said he wanted to see who would help him without knowing his name, without knowing his fame, and without expecting anything in return. His voice was firm and his decision was clear. His makeup artist entered the room and noticed the tension. Shaq looked at her and asked if she could make him look completely different. She was confused at first, thinking maybe Shaq wanted to film a movie or prank show. But when he explained his plan, her eyes widened. She asked him if he was serious. Shaq nodded slowly. She said it would take hours to change his appearance, but she could do it. She could make him look old, tired, and hopeless. She could make him look like someone nobody would recognize. His security team tried to talk him out of it. They reminded him that he was one of the most famous athletes on earth. Someone might still recognize him. But Shaq smiled and said that people only see what they expect to see. If they see a needy man, they will ignore him. If they see a struggling man, they will walk away. If they see someone sitting alone on the street, they will think he is just another stranger. The room stayed silent again. His team looked at him with confusion, fear, and respect all at once. No one had expected this from him. Shaq was always generous, always helping others, always donating to people who needed support. But now he wanted to go one step further. He wanted to experience life through the eyes of someone invisible. He wanted to understand what it felt like to be ignored, judged, or mistreated. He wanted to test humanity not from a distance but from the closest point possible. Finally, his manager sighed and said he would support him if Shaq promised to stay safe. Shaq thanked him and stood up. His tall figure filled the room, but today he did not feel big. He felt small inside, thinking about how many people suffered in silence every day. As he walked out, he whispered that this experiment would show the world something important. He did not know what he would find on the streets, but he was ready to face it. He wanted to see the truth even if it shocked him too. Shaq sat in the makeup studio early in the morning, long before sunrise. The place was quiet, and the large mirrors reflected his serious face. He was one of the most recognizable men in the world, but today he wanted to erase that identity completely. The makeup artist, a woman named Clara, placed her tools on the table slowly, still unsure if Shaq would change his mind. But when she looked into his eyes, she saw determination stronger than anything she had seen before. He was not joking. He was not doing this for fame or views. He was doing this because something inside him needed answers. Clara began by placing a thin layer of old age makeup on his skin. She added darker marks under his eyes to make him look exhausted. Shaq watched the transformation with a strange feeling. He had worn costumes before for movies and shows, but this was different. This time he did not want to look funny or dramatic. He wanted to look real, like a man who had been forgotten by society, like someone who slept on cold sidewalks and had no warm home to return to. She glued a fake beard on his face, rough and uneven. She added scars, wrinkles, and spots. Shaq's familiar skin tone changed slowly into something lifeless. His iconic smile disappeared under tired makeup. His eyebrows were made messy and his hairline was changed. His face looked older, much older. He stared at himself, shocked. The man in the mirror didn't look like Shaquille O'Neal at all. Next came the clothes. Shaq's assistant brought in a large bag with worn-out jackets, torn shirts, and old shoes. They looked uncomfortable, dusty, and heavy. Clara helped him put on a huge brown coat that looked like it had been found in an alley. The coat swallowed his size. His pants were baggy, faded, and had patches on them. His shoes were old, scratched, and too loose. He looked nothing like a superstar now, he looked like a man trying to survive. His security team watched with uneasy eyes. They knew people on the street could be unpredictable. But Shaq simply smiled at them and said they would stay far behind him. He wanted the experience to be real. He didn't want anyone to know he had help. When Clara finished the makeup, she turned the chair around and let Shaq look at himself one more time. Shaq blinked. He felt strange. He had lived a lucky life, filled with love, success, money, and fame. But the face he saw now carried years of struggle that he had never lived. That face made him think of the poor man from the video. It made him think of all the people sleeping outside every night with no help. Shaq pressed his hands together and took a deep breath. He whispered that he was ready. His team followed him out of the makeup room and toward the door that led to the streets of the city. It was early morning and the sky was slowly turning light blue. The city was waking up. Cars started moving. People rushed for work. No one cared about a man in ragged clothes stepping outside. Shaq walked slowly, feeling the cold wind hit his face. Even though he was wearing a thick coat, his body felt cold. Or maybe it wasn't the wind. Maybe it was the new reality he had stepped into. He walked toward a busy street corner and stopped near a bench. A few people walked past him without even raising their heads. His heart felt strange. Normally, wherever he went, people shouted his name, took pictures, laughed, and cheered. But today he was invisible. He sat down on the bench. The metal felt hard and cold. He looked around. No one cared. No one recognized him. No one even slowed down to check if he was okay. People were busy with their lives and Shaq was just another shadow in their way. A man selling coffee pushed his cart nearby. Shaq asked politely, "Sir, can I get a small cup of coffee?" The seller didn't even look at him. He just said, "No money, no coffee. Move aside." Shaq nodded quietly. He felt a little sad. Not because he didn't get the coffee, but because the seller didn't even look into his eyes. He didn't see a human. He saw a problem. A group of teenagers passed by. One of them laughed and said something rude about Shaq's size and clothes. They didn't know whom they were mocking. Shaq didn't respond. He looked down, realizing that this must be how people feel when society refuses to see their worth. Then something unexpected happened. A small old lady walked past him, then turned around and stopped. She looked at Shaq's face carefully. She didn't seem afraid. She didn't seem annoyed. She simply asked him, "Are you cold?" Shaq was surprised. It was the first time someone looked at him with real eyes. He nodded slowly. The lady opened her small bag and took out a tiny packet of tissues. She handed it to him, saying she didn't have much but hoped it helped. Shaq felt warmth in his chest. This woman had so little, yet she offered something. It was small but it was kindness. True kindness. And this was only the beginning. Shaq knew his journey had officially started. He didn't know who else he would meet, who would ignore him or who would surprise him. But he was ready. The disguise was complete and so was his mission. Shaq sat on the cold bench for a long time, watching the world move around him like he didn't exist. Cars rushed by. People walked fast. A bus stopped, opened its doors, and closed them again without anyone noticing the huge man sitting alone in torn clothes. Shaq had always lived in a world where everyone noticed him. But today he felt like a silent shadow, lost in the noise of the city. He shifted his body and pulled his old coat tighter around his shoulders. Even though he knew he could return to warmth anytime, he didn't move. He wanted to understand the life people lived when they had nowhere else to go. The feeling of helplessness pressed on his chest like a heavy weight. As the sun climbed higher, the streets grew busier. More people passed him, but still no one made eye contact. Some people stepped around him, giving him space as if he carried something dangerous. Others walked straight past without changing their speed. A few stared for a second, then looked away quickly, pretending they hadn't seen him at all. Shaq decided to stand up and walk a little. His legs felt stiff. The ground under his old shoes was rough, and he could feel tiny stones through the thin soles. He headed toward a small market street where dozens of people shopped every day. He wanted to see how people behaved in a crowded place. At the entrance of the market, he noticed a group of workers unloading boxes from a truck. Shaq stepped aside to not get in their way, but one worker glanced at him with irritation and said, "Don't stand here." Go somewhere else. His tone was sharp, almost angry. Shaq nodded and moved back. He understood something in that moment. People didn't just ignore the needy, they were afraid of them. They thought they were trouble. They thought they would ask for money. They thought they would cause problems. This realization stung in a way Shaq had not expected. He continued walking slowly through the market. The smell of fresh bread and roasted nuts filled the air. His stomach growled loudly. He hadn't eaten since early morning, and the hunger felt deeper because of the cold. Shaq approached a small bakery and smiled gently at the man behind the counter. "Sir, can I have a small piece of bread?" Shaq asked. His voice was soft, respectful. The man glanced at him once, then looked away. "We're sold out," he said quickly, even though a full tray of bread was right behind him. Shaq didn't argue. He simply nodded and stepped back. He realized something else. People sometimes chose lies over kindness. As he walked away from the bakery, he noticed a young couple holding hands. They whispered something to each other while looking at him. The girl tugged the boy's sleeve and they walked faster. Shaq lowered his head. It wasn't their fear that hurt him, it was the way they looked at him like he wasn't human. He moved to a quieter corner of the market and sat near a wall. His legs were tired again and the weight of the disguise felt heavier than before. A little boy holding a balloon walked by and stared at Shaq with wide, curious eyes. Children, Shaq realized, did not judge like adults. They saw things simply. The boy's mother quickly pulled him away, whispering, "Don't go near him." Shaq watched them leave and felt a deep ache inside him. He wondered how many people like him, people who seemed needy and alone, felt this kind of rejection every day. Hours passed slowly. Shaq tried asking for help again just to see how people reacted. Most ignored him. Some muttered, "Sorry," and kept walking. One man looked him up and down and said, "Get a job," before leaving. Shaq didn't respond. He just let the words sink in. But just when he was starting to feel hopeless, something unexpected happened again. A teenage girl wearing a school uniform walked past him, then stopped. She turned around, looking at him with concern. She approached him slowly, like she was unsure if she should come closer or keep her distance. "Sir, are you okay?" she asked softly. Shaq looked up, surprised. Her voice was kind, gentle. He nodded slowly, but the girl wasn't convinced. She reached into her school bag and pulled out a small lunch box. She held it out and said, "I haven't touched it yet. You can have it if you want." Shaq hesitated for a moment. He didn't want to take a student's food. But the girl insisted, pushing the box into his hands. "Please," she said. "You look like you need it more than I do." Shaq opened the box and found a sandwich, an apple, and a small packet of biscuits. He felt his throat tighten. This young girl, who probably didn't have much herself, showed more kindness than most adults he had met that day. "Thank you," Shaq whispered. His voice cracked slightly. The girl smiled and walked away, leaving Shaq with a warmth in his heart that pushed away the morning cold. He looked at the food and thought about the people he had met so far. The ones who ignored him, the ones who rejected him, and the two who gave him a moment of humanity. The world wasn't completely cold. But kindness was rare, hidden like small lights in a long, dark tunnel. Shaq knew this was only the beginning. His journey had just started, and he would soon learn truths he wasn't ready for yet. Shaq stayed in the corner of the market until the sky began to turn soft orange. The day had felt long, heavy, and painfully eye-opening. He had met many people, but only two had shown him any kindness. His body felt tired, but it was his heart that felt heavier. He now understood how invisible a needy person felt, like someone the world had decided not to see. As he slowly got up to walk toward a quieter street, he saw a woman sitting on the ground near a bus stop. She had a small grocery bag beside her, and she looked exhausted. Her clothes were simple, clean but old, and her hair was tied back loosely. She looked like someone who lived a hard life but still tried to hold herself together. Shaq didn't want to bother her, so he walked past her quietly. But after a few steps, he heard a soft voice behind him. "Excuse me, sir?" He turned around slowly. The woman was standing now, holding her grocery bag in one hand and looking at Shaq with gentle but concerned eyes. She didn't look scared of him. She didn't look annoyed. She looked worried. "You look cold," she said softly. "Do you have somewhere to go?" Shaq swallowed. He wasn't expecting anyone to ask him something so direct, so human. He shook his head slowly. The woman stepped closer. Not too close, she respected his space, but close enough to show she cared. "I don't have much," she said, "but please wait here." Before Shaq could respond, she walked into a nearby shop. He watched her through the window. She was talking to the clerk, then pulling out coins from her bag. She looked embarrassed because she didn't have enough money, but she insisted. After a short conversation, the clerk nodded and handed her something. Moments later, she stepped out holding a small cup of warm soup. She walked to Shaq and handed it to him carefully. "For you," she said, smiling softly. "It's not much, but it's warm." Shaq took the cup with both hands. The warmth went through his fingers and straight into his chest. He looked at the woman with wide eyes. She had bought soup using the little money she had. "Thank you," Shaq whispered, his voice low and emotional. The woman sat down on a bench nearby and gestured for him to sit too. Shaq sat slowly. He didn't want to break the moment. He didn't want to scare her away. "My name's Maria," she said quietly. "I saw you earlier in the market. You looked lost." Shaq nodded. "Just a long day," he answered softly. Maria smiled sadly. "Every day is long when life is hard." Her words stayed in the air for a moment. Shaq realized she wasn't just helping him, she understood what struggle felt like. She opened her grocery bag and pulled out a small loaf of bread. Without hesitation, she tore it in half and placed one piece in Shaq's hand. "You should eat," she said. "Cold is worse when your stomach is empty." Shaq felt something break inside him. He had eaten in expensive restaurants his whole life. People always served him with respect and admiration. But this moment, this simple act, felt more meaningful than any five-star meal. He took a bite of the bread with the warm soup. The taste wasn't fancy, but it felt like the best food he had eaten all day. Maria watched him with gentle eyes as if making sure he was okay. After a few minutes, Shaq asked softly, "Why did you help me?" Maria didn't think long. She answered as if the reason was simple. "Because someone should. Everyone needs help sometimes. And if I can help even a little, I should." Shaq stared at her. She spoke with a strength he didn't expect. She continued, "Life is hard for many people. Some ignore it. Some pretend they don't see it. But if we start acting like we don't see pain, then what kind of world are we living in?" Shaq felt tears forming behind his disguise. He blinked them back. He didn't want her to notice. Maria then reached into her grocery bag again and pulled out a thin, old scarf. It wasn't expensive. It wasn't new. But she wrapped it gently around Shaq's neck. "It's cold tonight," she said. "Take it. I have another at home." Shaq wanted to refuse. He wanted to tell her she didn't need to give him anything. But the look in her eyes told him that refusing would hurt her more. So he nodded and whispered, "Thank you, Maria." Maria stood up slowly. She glanced at the bus schedule behind her. "My bus is coming soon," she said softly. "I hope you stay safe tonight." As she turned to leave, Shaq suddenly felt a deep ache. This woman, this stranger, had shown him more care in 20 minutes than most people had all day. She had no idea who he was. To her, he was just a needy man on the street. But she saw him. She helped him. She treated him like a human. Before stepping onto her bus, Maria turned around one last time and said, "The world is still good, sir. Don't lose hope." Shaq watched the bus drive away with a heavy but warm heart. He knew, without any doubt, that this woman had changed everything. And she had no idea who he really was. Shaq promised himself he would not forget her kindness. Because this was the moment his undercover journey truly transformed into something meaningful. Shaq stayed near the bus stop long after Maria's bus disappeared into the evening traffic. The scarf she wrapped around his neck still carried her warmth, and the soft smell of soap made him feel something he had not felt all day, human again. For a moment he thought the world wasn't so cold after all. But that feeling didn't last long. Night settled on the city. Street lights flickered awake, cars slowed down, and the sidewalks emptied. Shaq walked toward a busier street, hoping to observe how people behaved at night. His stomach felt lighter after the bread and soup Maria gave him, but his body still felt cold and tired. He found a small spot near a restaurant entrance where warm air escaped every time the door opened. He stood there quietly, hoping to warm his hands, but before long, a stern-looking security guard stepped outside. "Hey, move along," the guard said, waving his hand like Shaq was an unwanted animal. Shaq stepped back politely. "I'm just warming my hands a little," he said softly. "No excuses. You're scaring customers. Go somewhere else," the guard snapped. Shaq nodded and walked away. The guard didn't know who he was. He didn't know he was speaking to a man who had donated millions to charities, schools, and struggling families. To him, Shaq was nothing but a needy stranger standing in the wrong place. Shaq continued walking and found a small bench outside a grocery store. He sat quietly thinking. He had always believed everyone deserved respect, whether they were rich, poor, young, or old. But now he was living the reality that many people judged the needy without even speaking to them. Minutes later, a group of young men in hoodies walked toward him. Shaq tensed a little, not because he was scared of danger but because he knew confrontations often happened to people in his position. One of the young men pointed at him. "Look at this giant," he said loudly, laughing. Another said, "Yo, what's he wearing? He looks like a walking trash bag." They laughed loudly, not caring that Shaq heard them. Shaq lowered his head. He didn't want trouble. He didn't want to blow his cover. He simply stayed silent, hoping they would lose interest. One of the boys kicked the bottom of his shoe lightly. "You got any money?" he asked. Shaq shook his head. "No, sorry." The boys laughed again and walked off, leaving Shaq alone with the cold wind. He stared down at his hands. He had never felt so powerless. He lived a life where people usually respected him. But here, dressed as someone in need, he was a target for insults, judgment, and fear. Shaq leaned back on the bench and breathed deeply. The experiment was working. He was seeing the world clearly, maybe more clearly than he wanted to. A few minutes later, a man in a business suit passed by. Shaq politely asked, "Sir, do you have a spare $1? I'm trying to get something warm to drink." The man didn't even stop walking. He looked at Shaq as if he was something dirty on the ground. "Get a job," the man muttered under his breath before disappearing into the store. Shaq didn't argue. He didn't defend himself. He simply looked down again, realizing how fast people judged without understanding. His back hurt. His legs felt stiff. And the heavy coat felt heavier with every passing minute. Being needy was not just about hunger, it was about being unwanted everywhere you went. Then suddenly, a soft, familiar voice broke through the noise of the night. "You're still here?" Shaq lifted his head and saw Maria walking toward him, carrying 2 grocery bags. Her steps were hurried, her face filled with worry. She placed her bags down and knelt beside him. "I was hoping you found a place to stay," she said. "Why are you sitting out here?" Shaq didn't know how to explain. He simply said, "Just nowhere to go right now." Maria looked at him with deep concern. "You shouldn't be alone out here. It's dangerous." She reached into one of her bags and pulled out a small plastic container. "I made soup for my kids tonight, and I brought extra just in case I saw you again." Shaq blinked, completely surprised. Maria had so little, yet she still thought of him. She opened the container and handed it to him with a spoon. "Please eat," she said gently. "It will warm you up." Shaq took a spoonful, feeling warmth spread from his throat to his chest. He felt his eyes sting with emotion. He had met hundreds of people in his life, celebrities, athletes, businessmen, but very few had hearts like Maria's. Maria sat beside him and watched the street. "People judge too quickly," she said softly. "But life is not always what it looks like from the outside." Shaq nodded slowly. She continued, "Some people need help, not because they're weak, but because life hit them harder than they expected." Her words pierced him deeply. She looked at him again. "Don't lose hope. Okay?" Shaq nodded again, barely able to speak. Maria stood up, picked up her bags and said, "I'll check on you again if I see you tomorrow." Then she walked away into the night, her silhouette fading under the streetlights. Shaq watched her go, feeling something powerful rise inside him. Kindness was rare. But when it appeared, it shined brighter than anything else in the world. Anne Maria's kindness would soon change her life in a way she never imagined. Shaq woke up the next morning feeling stiff from sleeping on a cold bench. His heavy coat had kept some warmth, but the pain in his back reminded him that thousands of people lived like this every night, with no choice, no comfort, and no bed. He stretched his arms slowly, trying not to draw attention as the city began to wake up. What most people didn't know was that Shaq's team had set up hidden cameras in different parts of the street the night before. They stayed far away, disguised as normal people, recording everything quietly. Shaq had insisted they stay hidden. He wanted to experience the truth, not a staged moment. Now, his team watched from a distance as Shaq moved through the morning crowd. The world looked different at sunrise. Some people rushed to work with coffee in hand. Others walked their dogs. A few stopped at food stalls for breakfast. But no one stopped to look at the tall, tired man struggling to warm his hands in his coat. Shaq decided to walk toward a busy food truck line. The smell of fresh eggs, toast, and hot tea filled the air. His stomach tightened with hunger. He hadn't eaten since Maria's soup last night, and the cold had drained what little energy he had left. He stood near the side of the line, not asking for food, not bothering anyone, just trying to gather the courage to speak. Finally, he approached a middle-aged man eating a sandwich. "Sir, excuse me," Shaq said softly. Do you maybe have a spare $1? I'm just trying to eat something small. The man stared at him for a second, then rolled his eyes. Go find a shelter, he said sharply. Don't bother me. Shaq nodded and stepped back. He wasn't angry. He wasn't offended. But the rejection still stung because he had been polite. He had asked kindly. Yet still, the man treated him like a burden. A woman behind the counter noticed him standing awkwardly near the truck. She leaned out and waved her hand like she was shooing a stray animal. Move away from the customers, she said. You're making people uncomfortable. Shaq apologized quietly and walked away. His team caught everything on the hidden cameras. Their hearts tightened. It was painful to watch the world treat him like this, even though they knew he wasn't really needy. But they also realized this was the reality for thousands of real people. Shaq sat on a low step near a shop, trying to calm his breathing. His disguise felt heavier every second. He kept thinking about Maria, the only person who had looked at him like a human being. Just as he lowered his head, a group of office workers walked past. One man threw his food wrapper on the ground near Shaq's feet and said, "Pick that up for me, will you?" His co-workers laughed. Shaq didn't react. He simply picked up the wrapper and placed it in the trash can. He didn't want to fight. He just wanted to understand. The hidden cameras captured every insult, every cold shoulder, every quick glance filled with fear or judgment. One of Shaq's team members whispered, "This is heartbreaking. People really treat strangers like this." The director beside him said quietly, "This is why Shaq wanted to do it. People only see what they want to see." Hours passed and Shaq continued observing. Some people ignored him completely. Some moved away. Some whispered rude things. A few looked at him with pity but still refused to help. But then, when he least expected it, he heard a soft voice again. "You haven't eaten yet, have you?" Shaq lifted his head slowly. Maria was standing there. Her hair was tied back neatly, and she wore the same simple clothes as yesterday. She carried a small bag in one hand and a lunchbox in the other. Her eyes were warm, full of genuine concern. "I checked the places around here hoping to find you," she said gently. "You look weaker today." Shaq didn't know what to say. He had no idea she would return. He felt a deep warmth in his chest that pushed away the morning cold. Maria sat beside him and opened the lunchbox. Inside were 2 boiled eggs, a piece of bread, and a small serving of rice. She handed it to him carefully. "I packed extra food this morning," she said. "My kids had enough, so this is yours." Shaq took the lunchbox slowly, his hands trembling. "Maria, you don't have to." "I know," she interrupted softly. "But I want to." The hidden camera across the street zoomed in. Shaq's team watched silently as she placed her hand on his arm gently, comforting him in a way no one else had. Then she reached into her small bag and pulled out a pair of old gloves. "It's colder today," she said. "Wear these. I don't want you getting sick." Shaq felt his throat tighten. Maria had so little, yet she gave so much. She didn't know she was helping a millionaire. She didn't know cameras were watching. She didn't know the world would soon hear her story. She helped him simply because she cared. Shaq ate slowly, trying not to cry through his disguise. Maria sat with him, talking softly about life, kindness, and how every little act of love could change someone's day. She had no idea how much she was changing his. The hidden cameras kept recording. Shaq's team kept watching. And the truth became clearer with every moment. Most people avoided him. Some insulted him. Many judged him. But Maria, the woman with almost nothing, gave him everything she could. Shaq knew then. This social experiment was no longer just about seeing how people behaved. It was about her. And she had no idea her kindness was about to change her life forever. Shaq watched Maria walk away after giving him food and gloves, but something inside him didn't let him stay seated. He felt a strange pull, a need to understand her life, her struggles, her world. She had helped him twice without hesitation, and each time she gave pieces of herself that she clearly needed. And yet, she smiled as if giving made her stronger. Shaq stood up slowly, making sure she was far enough ahead that she wouldn't notice him following. He didn't want to scare her. He didn't want to invade her privacy. He only wanted to know who this woman was, and why her kindness shined like a light in a world full of cold hearts. Maria walked with steady steps, even though Shaq could tell she was tired. Her grocery bag swung slightly at her sides. She crossed the street, past a bakery, and walked into a narrow neighborhood filled with small apartments. Laundry hung from balconies. Children played in corners. The buildings were old, cracked, and worn, but life moved inside them. Shaq stayed a few steps behind, blending into the crowd as best as a 7-foot-tall man could. But in his disguise, people barely looked at him. He was invisible again, but this time he didn't feel the pain of invisibility. He only felt curiosity and respect. Maria finally reached an old building with chipped paint and rusty railings. She pushed open the gate, which squeaked loudly, and climbed the stairs slowly, as if her legs were tired from working too long. Shaq stayed outside, pretending to search through a trash bin to avoid suspicion. He saw her reach the second floor and disappear through a small door with a faded number painted on it. Shaq felt something twist inside him. This woman who had given him soup, bread, a scarf, and gloves, lived here? In a small, worn-out apartment? Did she even have enough money for her own needs? He waited for a moment, unsure of his next move. His team watched from far away, just as curious and emotional. They knew Shaq wasn't following her for entertainment, he was following her heart. After a few minutes, Maria came out again, this time without the grocery bags. Her hair was combed neatly and she looked a little more rested. She held a small lunchbox and a worn-out purse. Shaq realized she must be going to work. He followed her again. 10 minutes later, she entered a cleaning supply store. From the outside, it looked like a regular store, but next to it was a narrow entrance that led to a housekeeping agency. A faded sign read, "Cleaning helpers, day and night jobs available." Shaq felt his heart tighten again. She worked as a cleaner. Her hands, tired from helping others all day, still found the strength to help a stranger like him. Shaq stood outside the building in disbelief. He saw her sign in at a small desk. She smiled politely at the receptionist, who barely looked at her. Then she picked up a mop and bucket and walked into the hallway. A cleaner. A woman working long hours. Probably for minimum wage. Probably supporting a family alone. Yet she still gave him her food, her warmth, her time. Shaq felt something heavy drop in his stomach. Suddenly, a small voice pulled him out of his thoughts. "Mom? Mom, you forgot my lunch." Shaq turned and saw a little boy, maybe 7 or 8, running toward the building with a small backpack bouncing behind him. Maria rushed back out, her eyes widening. "Oh no, sweetie, I'm so sorry," she said, kneeling and hugging him tightly. "Mommy was rushing and forgot." The boy hugged her back. "It's okay." Maria fixed his backpack and placed the lunchbox gently inside. "Eat during break, okay? And don't fight with your sister." "I won't," the boy said with a small smile. Maria kissed his forehead. "Go straight to school. I'll see you tonight." Shaq stood frozen. She had children. 2 maybe. And she was still helping strangers. The boy ran off, and Maria returned inside with her mop and bucket. Shaq watched her disappear into the hallway, her strength almost unbelievable. He felt an ache so deep it made him breathe heavier. She wasn't just kind. She wasn't just generous. She wasn't just caring. She was surviving. She was struggling. She was giving from a place of shortage, not abundance. Shaq stepped back from the building and leaned against a wall, his chest tight. He thought about all the millions he had earned, the comfort he lived in, the warm home he slept in. And then he thought about Maria's food, scarf, gloves, time, and kindness, all given freely without hesitation, without fear, without expecting anything. This was the truth he needed to see. His experiment had started as a test for the world, but now it had become a test for himself. He whispered to himself, "She deserves better. She deserves more than this world gives her." His security team approached him quietly, their faces full of emotion. One of them said, "Shaq, what do you want to do now?" Shaq looked up, and for the first time since the experiment started, he wasn't sad, he was determined. "We're going to change her life," he said firmly. "Everything changes for her now." And he meant it with every beat of his heart. Shaq sat in the small alley behind the cleaning agency, waiting for Maria's shift to end. The sun was slowly dropping behind the buildings, painting the sky in orange and purple. People were rushing home after work, cars honked in long lines, and streetlights started to glow. But Shaq didn't notice any of that. His heart was pounding so loudly it felt like the whole city could hear it. Today was the day he would reveal the truth. He touched the old scarf Maria had wrapped around his neck 2 days ago. It reminded him of everything she had done for him, without knowing who he really was, without wanting anything in return. Her kindness had come from her heart, not from recognition or reward. Shaq's makeup team arrived quietly in a small van parked near the alley. They stepped out carrying makeup removers, wipes, brushes, and warm water. Shaq sat on a chair placed behind the van, hidden from the street. The makeup artist Clara looked at him seriously. "Are you sure you want to reveal yourself today?" Shaq nodded. "She deserves to know." Clara began wiping away the layers of makeup. The old age wrinkles disappeared. The fake scars dissolved. The dusty beard came off. His real skin tone returned, smooth and familiar. Slowly, the tired stranger vanished and the tall, strong, famous Shaquille O'Neal reappeared. Even his security team stared in awe. The transformation was shocking. The world's most recognizable face was back. Shaq changed into clean clothes, a simple hoodie and jeans. Nothing fancy. He didn't want to overwhelm Maria. He wanted her to feel safe. He wanted her to see the man she had helped, not the celebrity she knew from TV. By the time Maria stepped out of the cleaning agency, Shaq was ready. She looked exhausted. Her shoulders were slumped and her steps were slow. She carried a small plastic bag with leftover dinner from the staff room and a few cleaning supplies for home. Shaq watched her quietly. His heart hurt seeing how tired she was. She walked past the alley without noticing him. Shaq stepped out slowly. "Maria," he called softly. She froze. The voice didn't sound like the needy man she had helped. It sounded stronger, clearer, familiar. Maria turned around carefully. Her eyes widened when she saw him, a tall, clean, well-dressed man standing under the streetlight. She took a step back. "Sir, do I know you?" Shaq smiled gently. "Yes, you do." He reached into his pocket, pulled out the scarf she gave him and held it up. Maria's eyes went wide. Her mouth opened slightly. She covered her lips with her hand. "No, no, that can't be," she whispered, shaking her head slowly. Shaq stepped closer. "Maria, it's me." Her eyes filled with confusion. She looked at his face over and over, searching for the tired stranger she had fed and cared for. You were that man? The one sitting on the street?" she asked, her voice trembling. Shaq nodded. "You helped me, when no one else did." Maria's breath hitched. Tears slid down her cheeks. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. This wasn't just any man. This was Shaquille O'Neal, one of the most famous athletes on the planet. "But, why?" she whispered. "Why were you pretending to be?" Shaq interrupted gently. "I wanted to see the truth. I wanted to see if kindness still existed in the world." He placed his hand on his chest. "And you showed me more kindness than I could ever expect." Maria shook her head again, overwhelmed. She wiped her eyes and said, "I didn't know who you were. I didn't help you for any reward." "I know," Shaq said softly. "That's why it meant everything to me." Maria stood silently, tears streaming down her face. She didn't know what to say. Shaq stepped closer and opened the small box his assistant had handed him earlier. Inside were house keys, an envelope, and a printed document. "I want to give you something," Shaq said. Maria looked confused. She shook her head quickly. No, you don't need to give me anything. I didn't help you for this." Shaq smiled warmly. "I know. That's exactly why I want to." He handed her the keys first. "These are for a new apartment. Fully furnished. Already paid." Maria gasped. Her hand shook so badly she almost dropped the keys. He handed her the envelope next. "This is your debt, completely paid off." Maria covered her mouth, crying harder now. Her knees almost gave out. "And this," Shaq said, showing her the final document, "is a trust fund for your children. Enough money to support their education and future." Maria couldn't speak. She couldn't breathe. She dropped her bag and food spilled onto the ground. She didn't even notice. Shaq reached out and caught her shoulders gently. "Maria, you saved me. Now let me help you." Maria sobbed into her hands. She sank into Shaq's arms, hugging him tightly, not because he was famous, but because she finally felt hope after years of struggle. "You're an angel," she whispered through tears. Shaq shook his head. "No, Maria. You are." The streetlight glowed softly above them. And in that moment, the woman who had given her heart to a stranger received the biggest blessing of her life. And she still had no idea what the unbelievable ending tomorrow would bring. Maria woke up the next morning feeling like she had lived a dream. Her mind kept replaying the night before, Shaq revealing himself, the scarf in his hand, the keys, the trust fund, the apartment, everything. She had cried until her pillow was wet. She had prayed with shaking hands, thanking God for a blessing she never expected. Her children stood by the door watching her. They could tell something was different. Maria smiled at them, a real smile, one she had not worn in years. She hugged them tightly and whispered that everything was going to change. But she didn't know how much more was coming. Across the city, Shaq's team prepared for the final moment of his social experiment. They edited the hidden camera videos, added captions, and put together the full story. Maria's kindness, the reactions of the people on the street, Shaq's struggles, and the emotional reveal. It wasn't just a video. It was a message to the world. Meanwhile, Shaq asked Maria to meet him at the community center downtown. She arrived nervously, her children beside her, their small hands gripping hers. She wasn't sure what to expect. She only knew Shaq wanted to talk to her again. The moment she stepped inside the building, she gasped. The entire room was filled with people. Camera crews, journalists, volunteers, workers. And right in the middle of it all, Shaq smiling warmly. Maria froze. Her son tugged her dress. "Mom, is this for you?" Shaq stepped forward and opened his arms. "Maria, come here." Maria walked slowly toward him. Everyone in the room turned to watch her. She felt shy, overwhelmed, confused. Shaq placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "Maria, today, the world will know your story." Before she could ask what he meant, a huge screen behind them lit up. A video began to play. There he was, Shaq, in his disguise, sitting on the bench, being insulted, being ignored, being pushed away. Maria covered her mouth instantly, tears forming again. Then the video showed her, feeding him soup, giving him bread, wrapping the scarf around his neck, offering gloves, talking to him with warmth and respect. The room grew silent. People watched her with admiration, many with tears in their eyes. Next, the video showed her in the cleaning agency, working hard, caring for her children. The audience saw everything, her struggle, her strength, her kindness. Finally, the reveal appeared on screen. Shaq removing his makeup. Shaq calling her name. Maria crying. Shaq giving her the gifts. By the time the video ended, the entire room was emotional. Some people clapped softly. Some wiped their tears. Some whispered how amazing she was. Maria felt her knees weaken. She could barely breathe. Shaq led her to the front and raised her hand gently, like she had won a championship. "Everyone, this is Maria. The woman who reminded me that kindness still exists." The room erupted with applause. Maria's children held onto her tightly, smiling with pride. Shaq continued, "Maria didn't give hundreds of dollars. She didn't have luxury things. She didn't have free time. She didn't even know who I was. Yet she gave me everything she could from her heart." More applause. But Shaq wasn't done. He pointed toward a covered object on the stage. A large white cloth had something big. "Maria," Shaq said gently, "the apartment and the trust fund were just the beginning." Maria blinked rapidly. "What do you mean, beginning?" Shaq nodded to one of his team members. The cloth was pulled away. Maria gasped. It wasn't just an object. It was a giant board with a bold headline. Maria's Kindness Foundation, helping families in need. Underneath it were logos of sponsors, charities, and Shaq's own organization. Shaq spoke softly but powerfully, "Maria, I'm creating this in your name. You will be the head of this foundation. You will help hundreds of families like yours. You will change lives, just like you changed mine." Maria burst into tears. Her children cried too, hugging her tightly. The audience stood up in a standing ovation. Shaq continued, "We'll give you training, a full salary, a support team, and everything you need. This is your new job. You deserve this." Maria couldn't speak. She could only cry and shake her head in disbelief. Shaq wiped a tear from her cheek. "You gave me hope when I needed it most. Now I want the whole world to feel what you gave me." Maria hugged Shaq tightly, crying into his chest. He hugged her back like a brother, gently and warmly. When she finally pulled away, she whispered, "Why me?" Shaq smiled softly. "Because kindness finds the right people. And you are one of the rare ones." The cameras captured every moment. And that day, millions of people around the world watched her story. Maria went home not as the tired cleaner the world ignored, but as the woman who changed a giant's heart and inspired a global movement of kindness. The unbelievable ending wasn't the apartment. It wasn't the money. It wasn't even the foundation. It was this. A simple woman with a pure heart reminded the world what humanity truly means. And Shaq made sure the world would never forget her.